Now, due to rising demand, Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing, the primary manufacturer of cutting-edge chips used in artificial intelligence applications, is anticipated to report a 40% increase in third-quarter profit on Thursday. NVIDIA and Apple are amongst the clients of the world's largest contract chip maker, which has profited from the trend towards artificial intelligence. According to LSEG's smart estimate compiled by 22 analysts, TSMC is expected to announce a net profit of $9.27 billion for the quarter that ended in September 30th. Forecasts from analysts who are more consistently correct are given more weight by smart estimates. Now, for more on these stories, we're joined by Uwaoma, who is founder and CEO of the Xavian Group. Haizu, good morning to you. It's great to have you on the show.
How are you doing today?
Very well, thanks. And yourself?
Pretty well.
Good.
Pretty well.
All right, let's begin with, some of the main reasons why China is cooling inflation for September, and what likely effects will this have on the overall economy?
Interesting thing, I think it's two things. It's strategy and it's culture. But culture always eats strategy.
For breakfast.
For breakfast, yes. Fundamentally, deflation in PPI, which is Producer Price Index, means that, there's better stability in terms of price control from a consumer perspective, right? There's stability of pricing, but that's a consumer commission. But for the producer in that supply chain, it means there's a lower profit margin. So that sends a wrong signal to investors who want to invest in that. That's on one end. And of course, on the other end, what it also means is that there's a lot more pressure for the businesses, right? So a deflation price PPI price index, right, is fundamentally going to stabilize, right, the current inflation. I think they've been on a delicate balance for a very long time. The inflation is quite on a delicate balance, so that's good news. That's good news. But why I said culture with all these strategies, that there's a general perception that the Chinese guys are almost to a large extent, capitalism. So it's anti-capitalism to reduce profit margin by PPI, right? So what that means practically is that the government can sweep in with that advantage, and fiscal policy and monetary policy strategies can help. So in terms of monetary policy, from the announcement last week, what that means is that first, fundamentally, is that they've reduced interest rates, right? So that reduction in interest rate in monetary policy will be backed up by fiscal policy, where there's better government spending through stimulus. They already made an announcement of setting stimuluses to rechannel that distribution of circular flow of income from the government spending perspective, right? And then the second thing that would happen, of course, is this announcement that they made about the reserve ratio for how much banks can hold, meaning that they want banks to hold lesser money so they can spread the money around. So in the end, you see, that's a really advanced country. That's the second biggest economy in the world. So it's good news for the people who live in China in terms of their pricing is more controlled. You can walk into the market and predictably be sure that there's no increase in price. Looking at Nigeria, that's a total inverse and opposite in Nigeria. But for the producers, that's like a bad thing. And for people who are speculators, who are trying to invest in China, that's a pretty bad thing. But it's a win in the end. China has gone through a lot in the last 4 or 5 years, and they're finally stabilizing their inflation. It's quite stable, in my own opinion. And then they will do whatever it takes to make that still very stable. And that's what they're doing with fiscal and monetary policy. A deflation in PPI generally would just basically be a loss to the capitalists, but a win to the people. And China fundamentally is a people's republic of China. So people is
very fairly put. And with what you just mentioned, and looking at PPI deflation is more specifically, what kind of impact will this have on global trade and economies that also rely on Chinese goods?
Yeah. So here's the thing, right? So China has, because there are 1 billion people in China, over 1 billion people in China, they literally run two parallel economies. The economy for China and the economy that affects the rest of the world, right? So there's domestic, what you call GDP, and then there's exports market, right? Don't forget that because of the massive growth in the per capita income of Chinese people, a lot of production has moved away from China because Chinese production is not as cheap as it used to be. People like Taiwan, Vietnam, and all those neighboring countries are beneficiaries of that. So from the global perspective, it means that investors will be a bit more wary, right? Meaning that the neighboring countries around that, right, would benefit more a lot around that. They're struggling with that generally. So that's what it means globally, right? The world is looking, and because we still have, I'm not going to say trust issues, but fundamentally the way the world's looking at China is we're not sure where they're going to, right? So that sends a wrong signal to people in China. But for all the neighbor, for everyone's win, for someone's win, there's always another person who is going to lose, and vice versa. I think that the biggest winners of this will be the countries around Asia, right? Let's not forget that. We finally have a poster boy of a major semiconductor brand, right, from Taiwan, and then all the neighboring countries here. So I think it's a win in general for the rest of the world, right? And China has constantly been predicted to be the number one, but they're still number two in terms of GDP and size of economy. So I think that's pretty much what it is. I really wish Africa, somewhere along the line, could have tapped into all of that, because cheap labor is a variable. And Africa, by its population and its per capita income, no other continent should have cheaper labor. But then there are other things deeper than cheaper labor. Nigeria can't brag in that conversation because cheaper labor is not supported by infrastructure. So people want to work here because, they ship things here because the labor is cheaper, but how about power? Power is not cheaper, security is not stable, right? So that are the variables. That's in terms of the global perspective to things.
Certainly very cogent points, and that's a conversation we have to have on another day. But trust, like you mentioned, is also very key, but it appears that they've also put some measures in place. Yeah. Well, let's go ahead and look at Boeing. I will share my sentiments in a bit, but firstly, to cut 17,000 jobs. How, firstly, are they addressing workforce concerns? Do you believe that Boeing has done enough? And perhaps you can add some more color to the background around the story.
All right, so Boeing, unlike China, they haven't gotten the credit that they deserve. I mean, yes, in the last 6 years, they've had a crazy run, terrible run, from the back-to-back crash of 737, and then the COVID happened. No other industry was hit with COVID than aviation, right? Of course, they've had a crazy run. But then, if you still look at it, Boeing is the poster boy for operational excellence, irrespective of whatever the reliability is. Don't forget that it's about 1 in 10 million flights that's likely going to have a crash, and that's powered by Boeing. Let me put this in context. 1 out of 10,000 cars on the road will have an accident. 1 out of 10,000. 1 out of 10 million is what's likely going to have an issue. So Boeing is still by far one of the largest reliable companies in the world. And I think that the new CEO who just jumped in has got to work on the PR to remind people that the only reason why America is standing as one of the most operationally excellent countries, I think the only two countries that come close to America will be Japan and Germany when you talk about excellence of products, right? German products are excellent, Japanese products are excellent. There's a reason why almost all the Ubers are literally Corollas, Toyota, right? I think America has to come in and help out. But on the second end, Boeing is going through a crisis with 17,000 job cuts. 17,000 job cuts is 10% of their total workforce, right? And that's quite a lot. But it also gives us an idea of where the new CEO is thinking. I don't envy his job in any way. I mean, his first 1 week, he moved his office from where it used to be in Chicago to where it should be, right, which is the factory, which gives a signal that is more concerned not about the market, but about the product. You can either be the biggest in the market or own the biggest product or the most reliable product. And I think that is the offshoot of that is why you're having all of these job cuts amidst a lot of strike actions and all that. But Boeing, by far, is still one of the most reliable brands, and I think they should put more energy in PR. And now, on the second end of Boeing, they have a real monster to deal with, and it's competition. Airbus, in the last 4 or 5 years, have created more superior product, leverage on their brand decline, right? Because brands are like empires, they rise and fall. Once an empire falls, there's going to be another rise of empire. They need to deal with that. But I mean, in my own opinion, right, Boeing is still one of the operationally excellent brands, and he needs to put more energy in the perception of that, reminding people, like we say in business and management consulting, the only thing more important than what you'd ever sell is what you make the buyer believe that he's buying. So there's a lot of belief and perception that has to happen. And then two, they have to be able to look at the other revenue stream that they have. Because when we think of Boeing as an aviation brand that produces planes, but that's just maybe 50% of their whole revenue stream. They are big in defense. Don't forget that the war, we have literally like 3-4 wars running in parallel right now, and they're the biggest players in that, whether it's the aircraft, the missiles, and all that, and of course retraining. So they can push a lot more.
I mean, you're talking about perception, and I bet that quite a number of people will disagree with you on perception for Boeing. Then again, it's all about your experiential,
Absolutely.
How you've experienced it as well. And I wish we had a lot more time to get into it, but of course, perception is key. Undoubtedly, the airline has hit some very turbulent times in recent years, but it'll be very important to work on that PR. As we've completely run out of time, unfortunately, so we can't get through the other headlines, but many thanks for joining us on the Global Business Report. We'll see you again very soon.